The stars above the Tirian world never seemed so cold. Advisor Vet stood by the wide observation window of the Alliance command tower, staring into the night sky, where out of his sight, 3 full Tirian battle fleets were perishing. He saw nothing from the surface, but reports were coming in one after another, and each was worse than the last. He read them in silence. His long blue fingers trembled as he held the data tablet. The 3rd fleet had just gone silent. 1,200 warships had vanished in less than 2 hours. The Vorkai Empire had arrived without warning 3 weeks ago. They emerged at the outer edge of the Tirian star system like a slow, black tide, thousands of ships, heavy cruisers, siege platforms, and carriers kilometers in length. The Tirian Alliance immediately began to resist. They believed they could stop the invasion. They had good ships, trained crews, and years of military preparation. They believed that would be enough. It was not enough. The Vorkai did not fight like other species. They did not hold back. They did not negotiate. They did not send warnings, and they issued no demands. They simply arrived and destroyed everything in their path. Their weapons burned through Tirian shields as if they weren't there. Their formations moved in ways no Tirian military mind could predict. Their ships took damage and kept pushing forward. The Vorkai were brutal, patient, and entirely merciless. Vet turned away from the window and walked to the central command table. The room was full of officers and aides. They all spoke in quiet, tense voices. On every screen, maps of the star system glowed. Red markers designated the positions of the Vorkai fleets. There were so many red markers. They were closing in. General Tar, head of Tirian defense, walked over to Vet. The general's gray skin looked pale. His 4 eyes were dark with exhaustion. "Advisor," Tar said quietly, "the 3rd fleet is destroyed. We have confirmation. Admiral Evan's flagship was destroyed 40 minutes ago." Vet closed his eyes for a moment. Admiral Evan had been his friend, a good officer. He had served the Alliance for 30 years. "How much time do we have?" Vet asked. "Before they reach the inner planets?" Tar hesitated. 7 days, maybe 8 if they slow down to regroup, but so far they aren't slowing down. What forces do we have left? Patrol ships, defensive platforms around the home planet, a few reserve cruisers. Nothing that could stop what is coming. Tar's voice was emotionless. "I am not giving up. I am simply stating a fact, Advisor. We need help. We cannot win alone." Vet already knew this. He had known it for days. The question was where the help would come from. The Tirian Alliance had allies, neighboring species, and trade partners. He had sent requests to all of them. Some responded with sympathy. Some did not respond at all. No one had ships to spare. No one wanted to go to war against the Vorkai Empire. The Vorkai were feared in 40 star systems. No one wanted to stand in their way. This left one option, an option every member of Vet's council opposed. An option Vet himself had debated for 2 full days before accepting the fact that there was no other choice: a broadcast to the Death Worlds. The galaxy used the term Death Worlds to describe planets with extreme environments, planets with monstrous gravity, toxic atmospheres, dangerous radiation, and constant pressure from predators. Species that evolved in such worlds were different, physically tougher, more aggressive, more resistant to pain and injury. Most Death World species were considered unstable by galactic standards. Some were cruel, some were territorial. They were not the neighbors most civilized beings wanted. But right now, Vet needed warriors, not diplomats or trade partners. Warriors. Within range of the signal was a small group of known Death World species: the Kreta, the Valduns, and the Burning Hands of Serat. And on the very edge of this cluster, almost too far to be worth including in the calculation, was a young species from a single wet planet orbiting a yellow star, a species that had entered space only a few hundred years ago, a species that most in the galaxy considered secondary and insignificant. Humans, a terrestrial species, carbon-based bipeds from a planet called Earth, a world with high gravity compared to most habitable planets, a chaotic biosphere, extreme weather, and an evolutionary history of constant competition with predators. They had recently reached space. They had a small presence in the outer systems. They traded occasionally with a few alien species. Most galactic dossiers on them were sparse. The Tirian intelligence files on humans were only 3 pages long. Vet read those 3 pages 4 times. Humans were aggressive. That was clear. Their history was full of war. They had been on the verge of extinction by their own weapons several times. They were passionate, unpredictable, and, according to one Tirian diplomat who had met them personally, deeply unsettling. There was something in how they moved, something in the look in their eyes. The diplomat wrote that humans always seemed to be watching everything at once, like prey turned into predators that never forgot what it was like to be the hunted. Vet did not know if humans had warships capable of helping. He did not know if they would answer. He did not even know if they would understand the signal in time. But he had no other options left. He gave the order. The broadcast went out on all known Death World frequencies. It was simple, a distress signal, a marker of Tirian space, a single message in 7 languages, including the main galactic trade language that humans were known to use. The message read, "The Tirian Alliance is under attack. We are seeking warlike species. Any help is welcome. Coordinates attached. SOS sent to the most dangerous beings in the known galaxy." Then Vet returned to the window, looked at the cold stars, and waited. Would anyone answer? The signal reached Earth 14 hours later. It passed through a deep space relay station on the edge of the solar system, where monitors flagged it in seconds and ran it through 3 levels of automated filters before it landed on the desk of Dr. Sucho, senior analyst at Earth's Office of Deep Space Communications in Seoul. Sue read it twice, then read it a third time. She called up the source coordinates, cross-checked the sender's purity against the database of known alien contacts, and confirmed the identification. The Tirian Alliance, a mid-level civilization about 60 light-years away. Peaceful traders. No history of conflict with Earth. No previous distress signals. She reached for her comm device and made a call that climbed 4 levels of command in less than 10 minutes. Within an hour, the message reached the office of Earth's Minister of Defense. Within 2 hours, it reached an emergency meeting of the Global Security Council. The council chamber was deep underground. It was built 40 years ago, when humanity first confirmed they were not alone in the universe, and that not everything out there was friendly. The room was large and round. Screens covered every wall. 23 people sat at the central table. Military commanders, intelligence directors, and political leaders. The most powerful people on Earth were gathered in one place because a signal had arrived from 60 light-years away asking for help. Secretary General Anji Vorn presided over the meeting. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for making quick decisions under pressure. She had been in the position for 6 years. She had been briefed on the full scope of Earth's military assets from the first day she took office. She understood exactly what she was looking at. "The Tirian Alliance is being destroyed," said the Director of Intelligence. "Their battle fleets are gone. The attacking force is the Vorkai Empire. Our data on them is limited but consistent. They are an expansionist species. They have consumed 12 other civilizations in the last 200 years. They do not take prisoners. They do not negotiate once hostilities have begun." "How far is Tirian space?" asked General Pak Dion. He was the commander of Earth's strategic fleet, a large man with graying hair and very steady hands. 61 light-years, Sue said from her seat at the far end of the table. She had been invited to brief the council directly. "At standard jump drive speed, it is about a 3-week journey. And with our drives?" asked Anji Vorn, looking at Pak. The general met her gaze, a short pause. 11 days, he said, if we force the fleet to travel at peak capacity." A few people at the table shifted in their seats. A few exchanged glances. The number surprised them. 11 days to cover 61 light-years. This was far beyond anything in publicly known space travel records, because the engines Pak Dion was talking about were not publicly known. Almost nothing Earth had built in the last 30 years was publicly known. Secretary General Anji Vorn looked around the table at the military commanders, intelligence directors, and political leaders who were still realizing what this meant. "The Tirians sent this to the Death Worlds," she said quietly. "They sent this to warriors. They sent this to us because they are desperate and have nothing left." She paused. "The question before this council is, do we answer?" There was a long silence in the room. Then General Pak Dion placed both hands flat on the table. "We will answer," he said. No one objected. The base had no name on any open map. It was located at the Lagrange L4 point between Jupiter and the Sun, hidden from casual observation by a rotating electromagnetic scattering field and the immense distance from anything humans usually flew past. If one got close enough to notice it, it looked like a cluster of asteroids. Dark rock. Nothing interesting. Inside, it was something else entirely. Admiral Kim Soo-yeon had commanded this base for 7 years. She had watched it grow from a half-finished construction site into the most powerful military facility ever built by humanity. She knew every corridor, every dock, every ship in the fleet by name, configuration, and crew composition. She had personally supervised the final installation of the last dreadnought, standing on the captain's bridge while engineers performed final diagnostic checks and the crew stood in formation along the deck. She was at her desk reading a systems report when the encrypted transmission arrived from Earth. She read it once, put it down, picked it up, and read it again. Then she stood, walked to the window of her office, and looked at the fleet. They stood in the docks in long rows, stretching across 3 huge internal bays that had been carved into the asteroid's rock over decades of slow, careful excavation. Smaller ships were in front, destroyers and high-speed strike cruisers, sleek and dark, designed for speed and precision. Behind them were heavy cruisers, wider and more massive, loaded with long-range gun batteries and thick armor. And in the depths of each bay, in their own separate docking manipulators, were the dreadnoughts. There were 9 of them. Each was more than 2 kilometers in length. They were not elegant ships. No one built them to look beautiful. They were built to be unkillable and to kill. Their hulls were covered in reactive armor that could absorb and redirect energy weapons. Their engines ran on compressed fusion technology that no other species in the known galaxy had developed. Their weapon systems combined magnetic railguns, directed energy arrays, and a new class of kinetic torpedoes capable of tracking and course-correcting against electronic warfare. They carried full suites of strike craft. They had internal medical facilities, machine shops, manufacturing blocks, and food production systems that could support crews for over a year without resupply. They had names: Iron Resolve, Stone Sky, Burning Limit, Deep Strike, Pale Fire, Long Silence, Feeling, Red Shore, First Grief, Unwavering. Admiral Kim Soo-yeon had named them herself. She turned away from the window and activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "This is Admiral Kim," she said. "All ship captains, senior staff, and department heads report to the main briefing room in 1 hour. This is not a drill. We have received operational orders from the Global Security Council. Begin pre-start checks on all vessels. I want full readiness reports on my screen in 40 minutes. She closed the channel and began putting on her jacket. For 7 years, she had commanded a fleet that had never fired a single shot in real combat. A fleet that trained constantly, conducted endless simulations, and pushed all systems to the limit in exercises the rest of humanity didn't know about. A fleet created for a war that hadn't come yet. It was coming now, just not the war everyone had been preparing for. The briefing room held 400 people. Every seat was taken, and officers stood along the walls. The room was very quiet when Admiral Kim walked to the front and projected a star map onto the main screen. 3 days ago, she said, the Tirian Alliance broadcast an SOS on all Death World frequencies. Their armies are destroyed. They are being invaded by the Vorkai Empire. They asked for help from any warlike species within range. She paused. The Global Security Council has authorized a response. We are that response. The room became quiet, but the quality of the silence changed. It became heavier, focused. Our mission, Kim continued, is to make the jump to Tirian space, engage the Vorkai fleet, and remove them from the star system by any means necessary. We are not going as advisors. We are not going as observers. We are going as a battle fleet, and we will fight. She pulled up the known data on the Vorkai Empire, number of ships, projected weapon types, combat records obtained from galactic intelligence sources. The Council's intelligence had spent the last 36 hours gathering everything they could find. The Vorkai have won every species they have fought, said Kim. They are experienced fighters. Their ships are well armed. Based on their combat record, their tactics rely on mass, heavy forward pressure, and the psychological effect of a fleet that does not stop advancing, regardless of what losses it sustains. She let that information hang in the air. We have studied their tactics, she said. We understand them, and we have something the Vorkai have never faced before. She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room already understood what she meant. We leave in 18 hours, Kim said. Use this time well. Dismissed. Commander Pak Ji-ho was the captain of the Iron Resolve, the lead dreadnought of the fleet. He was 39 years old, originally from Busan, and had spent 18 of them in the space fleet. He was not the oldest captain in the fleet. He was not the most decorated. He had been given command of the Iron Resolve because Admiral Kim had evaluated every captain in the fleet and decided he was the best at what mattered most in combat, staying calm when things went wrong and making clear decisions in the midst of chaos. He walked through his entire ship after the briefing. He did this sometimes when he needed to think. The Iron Resolve was 2 kilometers long. The walk from end to end took almost an hour. He passed through crew decks, weapons bays, engineering sections, and strike craft hangars, where small fighters stood in launch racks like seeds waiting to be scattered. He stopped at the forward armor section and placed his hand on the inner wall. On the other side of that wall, 3 meters of composite and reactive plating separated him from open space. He thought about what awaited him at the end of this journey. A species fighting for its survival. A fleet that had already destroyed 1,200 enemy warships and was still losing. An enemy that had never been turned back once it set a goal. He thought about his crew. 840 people on this ship alone. In the whole fleet, more than 3,000 men and women who had trained for years for this very moment. He returned to the command bridge, sat in the captain's chair, and began reviewing his battle station assignments. 18 hours later, the fleet began to move. The docking clamps released one by one, and Earth's secret fleet emerged from the asteroid base in long, slow formations. First the destroyers, sliding out in tight groups, then the cruisers, heavier and more deliberate, then the dreadnoughts, massive and dark against the stars. Their engines built up power for the jump. The glow of their engines illuminated the space around the base like 9 slowly rising suns. Admiral Kim watched from the bridge of her flagship, long silence, as the fleet formed around her. She counted them on the screen. All in place. All ready. She thought of the Tirian advisor who had sent that signal, reaching out to the death worlds, reaching out to the most dangerous beings he could think of, because he had no other options left, perhaps not even expecting an answer, perhaps hoping against all odds that someone scary would appear. She almost smiled. Someone scary was on the way. Fleet in formation, her navigator reported. All engines showing green, ready to jump on your command, Admiral. Kim looked at the star map. 61 light years. 11 days at maximum power. Somewhere at the far end of that distance, a war was raging. A species was dying, and an empire that had never been stopped was about to encounter something it could never have imagined. Jump, she said. Space folded. The fleet vanished. The stars became quiet again. And no one outside the fleet and the council knew that Earth had just sent 53 ships and 9 dreadnoughts to answer a call for help from a species most people had never heard of. On the 9th day, Ambassador Gilvaris decided to stop hoping. He was monitoring the Death World frequencies from the communications center on a Tirian defense station orbiting the second planet. It was one of the last functioning military assets the Alliance had left. The Vorkai had not yet reached the inner system. They were still consolidating their control over the outer planets, moving with the heavy, confident stride of a force that knew it had already won. The SOS had gone out 12 days ago. There was no answer. Gilvaris had not expected much from the other Death World species. The Creta had confirmed receipt of the signal and sent a polite message explaining they had their own territorial conflicts. The Valdoons did not respond at all. The Burning Hands of Surat sent a brief message with payment terms that Advisor Vet had tried to negotiate, but the figures were impossible. The Tirian treasury could not afford what they were asking for. The humans had sent nothing. Gilvaris understood. It was a long-range signal to a little-known young species that barely had a presence in the galaxy. They probably hadn't even intercepted it, or they had intercepted it but had no idea what to do, or they simply didn't have ships capable of making the journey in time. He was reviewing the latest defense estimates, trying to figure out if there was any configuration of what was left of the Tirian fleet that could at least slow down the Vorkai advance, when the proximity alarm went off. He looked at the screen. His first thought was that the Vorkai had sent a scout element ahead of their main fleet. The sensors showed a large group of objects emerging from a jump on the outer edge of the system, but the configuration was wrong. The Vorkai entered in broad, stretched-out formations. These objects were entering in a tight, cohesive, disciplined formation, and there were many of them. The identification system was failing. It was checking the incoming signatures against every known alien ship profile in its database and finding no matches. "What is that?" Gilvaris said aloud. His sensor technician, a young Tirian named Voss, leaned over his station. All 4 of his eyes were wide open. His fingers moved quickly over the controls. Unknown configuration? Voss said. 53 different vessels. Engine signatures don't match any profile of a known species. He paused. They are very large, larger than our heavy cruisers. Some of them are much larger than our heavy cruisers. Gilvaris leaned forward. Are they broadcasting anything? Checking. Voss worked for a moment. Yes, broadband broadcast in the galactic trade language. He looked up. It's in the trade language. It says, "This is the Earth fleet. We received your signal. We are here. Please respond on this channel." Gilvaris froze for a moment. Then he grabbed the communication handset. "Earth fleet," he said carefully. His trade language sounded slow and clear. "This is Ambassador Gilvaris of the Tirian Alliance. We hear you. We did not expect an answer. Who are you? What are you?" The reply came after a short delay. The voice was calm, clear. The trade language was accented but understandable. "Ambassador, this is Admiral Kim Soo-yeon, commanding Earth's strategic fleet. We are humans. You sent an SOS to the Death Worlds. We are answering it. Can you give us a full tactical briefing on the current position of the enemy fleet?" Gilvaris found that for a moment he had no words. He had read the sparse intelligence dossier on humans. He had seen the description of a young species, limited presence in space, no known military fleet of significance. He had included them in the broadcast almost as an afterthought. He had never seriously expected an answer. And even if he had expected an answer, he had not expected this. 53 warships, unknown configuration, engine technology that covered 61 light-years in 11 days. He looked at Voss. Voss looked at him. Neither of them said a word. "Ambassador," the human admiral's voice sounded again. Patient, calm. "We don't have much time. Where is the enemy fleet?" Gilvaris cleared his throat and began transmitting everything he had. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Commander Pak Ji-ho studied the tactical display as data poured in from the Tirian ambassador. The picture was not good. The Vorkai had fully captured the outer system. Their main fleet was gathered around a gas giant where they were apparently using orbital fuel extraction infrastructure to replenish their ships. They had advanced patrol units scattered throughout the mid-system. Their total force strength, based on Tirian records, was between 1,800 and 2,000 warships. Pak's fleet numbered 53 units. He had gone through enough tactical training to know what those numbers looked like. Against almost any other fleet in the galaxy, 53 ships against 2,000 would be a massacre. But Admiral Kim had not come to this system for a war of numbers. She had come for a war of technology and shock. He brought up the dreadnought specifications on the screen and reviewed them again. Not because he needed to. He had memorized every figure. He did it because it helped him think. The dreadnought's main railgun could fire a kinetic projectile at a speed that would pierce any known alien ship armor with a single hit. The directed energy arrays could saturate a target zone fast enough to overwhelm standard shield regeneration. The reactive armor on the hull had been tested against every weapon profile in Earth's intelligence database and showed results above expectations in every test. The engines gave them speed and maneuverability that ships of that size should not have. And then there were the Mark 7 torpedoes, the Hunters, 60 per dreadnought. Semi-intelligent weapons that could track, adjust, identify countermeasures, and change course in flight. The Vorkai had electronic warfare systems. According to intelligence files, those systems couldn't do anything against the Mark 7. Pak closed the specs and looked at his bridge crew. They were focused, calm, exactly as they had trained. Every station manned, every system reporting green. The crew of the Iron Resolve consisted of 200 of the best people Earth's fleet had produced in the last decades. They were ready. He could see it in how they carried themselves. He opened the channel to Ambassador Gilvaris. "Ambassador," Pak said, "we want to help your defense forces coordinate during the battle. Can your remaining ships follow orders? Can they hold position when asked?" Gilvaris replied with a slight hesitation. "Our remaining vessels are patrol-class and defensive platforms. They are not combat-capable in the conventional sense against Vorkai warships, but they can hold position and follow orders." "Good," Pak said. "We want them behind us, far behind. They must not engage the enemy in direct combat. Their role is to provide sensor coverage and pick up wreckage or escape pods after the battle." Another hesitation. "After the battle," Gilvaris repeated slowly. "Yes," Pak said simply. "Commander," Gilvaris said cautiously, "I appreciate your confidence, but I need to be clear about what you are facing. The Vorkai fleet has nearly 2,000 warships. They have already destroyed 1,000. 200 of our best vessels. I do not want to give my people false hope. Pack nodded at the screen, though the ambassador couldn't see him. Ambassador, I understand. I am not giving you false hope. I am telling you what will happen. He paused for a moment. The Vorkai have not met us before. They do not know what these ships are. They do not know what our weapon systems are capable of. We have studied their tactics and their technology, and we are ready for both. This won't be a fair fight. No, Gilvaris agreed. Against 2,000 ships, it certainly won't be a fair fight. I meant that it won't be a fair fight for them, Pack said. There was a long silence on the channel. Then Admiral Kim's voice sounded over the fleet-wide command channel, smooth and unhurried. All ships, this is the Admiral. We are moving into the combat zone. Standard Delta formation. Dreadnoughts in front. Cruiser wings take flanking positions. Destroyers remain behind for interception. Strike craft remain in the hangars until called. We start in 30 minutes. She paused. This is what we built this fleet for. Remember your training. Trust your ships. Trust the person standing at the station next to you. She made one final pause. Earth is watching. On 53 bridges across the fleet, 3,000 human beings checked their stations one last time and prepared. The fleet began moving forward. In front of them, the red markers on the tactical display showed 2,000 Vorkai warships, oblivious that they were being approached by something their empire could never have imagined. Supreme Warlord Grax of the Vorkai Empire did not worry about surprises. He had participated in 9 conquest campaigns in 30 years. He had seen every tactic the weak species of this galaxy used when they were desperate. They formed defensive lines. They tried to protect their settlements. They sent ambassadors asking for peace. They broadcast signals to any allies they had. Grax had faced it all. He had crushed it all. The Tirians were no exception. Their fleets were brave. Their commanders were clever. None of that mattered. He stood on the command deck of his flagship, Immortal Wrath, reviewing fuel replenishment status when the sensor commander approached him. Warlord, he said, we have detected a fleet emerging from the edge of the outer system. Grax turned slowly. The Tirians have no fleet left. Non-Tirian ships, Warlord. Unknown configuration, 53 vessels. They are moving inward. Grax walked over to the sensor display. He looked at the incoming vessels for a long time. The profiles were unfamiliar. The engine signatures were unlike anything in the Vorkai intelligence database. But 53 ships against nearly 2,000. He almost laughed. Mercenaries? He asked. Possibly. They are broadcasting on Tirian frequencies. We cannot identify the species. It doesn't matter, Grax said. Whoever they are, they made a very stupid decision today. Send 200 ships to an intercept course. Use the 2nd Strike Division, destroy them, and return to the refueling schedule. Yes, Warlord. Grax returned to his refueling reports. He did not think about it. Admiral Kim watched as the Vorkai intercept forces lined up on the tactical display, 200 ships moving toward them in standard Vorkai assault deployment. Broad formation, fast advance, exactly as the intelligence files described. She had been waiting for this. All dreadnoughts, she said over the command channel, fire at will on my signal. Priority railgun fire on their heaviest forward ships. I want the first volley in the air before they are even in range of their own weapons. Acknowledged, the 8 captains replied. Pak Jiho was at his weapons station, personally monitoring target acquisition. The Iron Resolve's railguns had a range advantage over Vorkai energy weapons. A significant advantage. At this distance, the Vorkai ships couldn't hit them, but the Iron Resolve could hit the Vorkai. Pak had spent a lot of time thinking about the psychological aspect of the first exchange. When they were fired upon, the Vorkai expected the enemy to take a hit, start losing shields, and start retreating. That was how alien species behaved. That was how all their opponents behaved. They did not expect to take a hit before they even entered firing range. They did not expect what a dreadnought's projectile would do to one of their cruisers. Targeting locked, reported the weapons officer. All railgun batteries charged and ready. Pak looked at the tactical display. 9 dreadnoughts, 12 primary railgun batteries per ship. 4 projectiles ready to fire in each battery. That was 432 kinetic projectiles that could leave the guns in the first volley. Each was moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light. He waited, watching the distance counter count down the seconds. Mark, Admiral Kim said. The order to fire went out to all 9 dreadnoughts simultaneously. Iron Resolve shuddered. Not hard, more like a deep vibration that ran from bow to stern, felt more than heard. The rail batteries discharged in a controlled sequence, one after another in overlapping chains, maintaining the balance of power consumption across the ship's systems. Through the forward sensors, Pac watched the projectiles on heat tracking, dozens of white-hot streaks crossing the distance toward the Vorkai formation. The Vorkai ships were still accelerating toward them. Still 2 minutes until they reached their own firing range. None of them changed course. None of them deployed defensive countermeasures. Why would they? No one had ever fired at them from such a distance before. The first projectiles hit. A Vorkai heavy cruiser in the front row took 3 hits. Its hull plating was designed for sustained energy weapon fire, but it wasn't built for a kinetic strike delivered by a dreadnought rail battery. The first projectile went through the front hull like paper. The second pierced the engine section. The third detonated inside. As the projectile's fragmentation core activated inside the ship, the Vorkai heavy cruiser disintegrated. In 4 seconds, 7 other Vorkai ships ceased to exist. In the next 30 seconds, when the second and third volleys landed, 14 more were gone. The front row of the Vorkai intercept force simply vanished. The middle rows began to break formation, spreading out. The commanders were clearly confused by what was happening and where the fire was coming from. Then the Vorkai ships finally reached firing range and opened fire. The energy weapons that struck the hull of Iron Resolve were heavy, dozens of sustained beams from a dozen ships at once. On any other vessel Pac had seen in the galactic records, such concentrated fire would have stripped the shields, then the armor, then the structural integrity in seconds. On Iron Resolve, the reactive armor system activated. The outer layer of the hull absorbed and redirected the first waves of energy. The secondary plating dissipated the thermal load. The internal shielding held the rest. Pac felt the ship shudder. Warning lights came on for several systems. A minor power fluctuation in one weapons bay, some armor degradation in the front right section, but Iron Resolve did not slow down. It did not retreat. It kept pushing forward into the fire and kept firing. Damage report, Pac said. Outer armor layer at 74% in front. Secondary systems stable. All weapons fully operational. Crew casualties, 0. Pac released a slow breath. 0 casualties. He believed in the armor specs, but believing in something on paper and watching it work in reality were two different feelings. Continue fire, he said. Target the ships in the middle formation. Do not let them reorganize. Across the fleet, the same pattern repeated. Vorkai fire hit the human ships hard, but the human ships did not go down, while the Vorkai ships were going down with a speed that made no logical sense to anyone on those bridges. The alien commanders were transmitting distress signals. They were calling Grax for orders. They were slowing in indecision. Their aggressive tactics were suddenly useless against an enemy that took their heaviest fire and kept coming. Then Pac launched the Mark 7 torpedoes, 60 just from Iron Resolve, multiplied by all 9 dreadnoughts, 540 torpedoes in the air simultaneously. Each was a semi-intelligent hunter, programmed for the energy signature of the Vorkai engine core. The Vorkai had jamming systems, standard military electronic warfare countermeasures used by almost every spacefaring species in the known galaxy. The jamming systems activated immediately. Against normal torpedoes, they would have worked. Most torpedoes used simple guidance systems that relied on fixed locks that could be broken. The Mark 7 torpedoes did not use fixed locks. They used a constantly updated threat assessment system that could distinguish a jamming signal from a real engine signature, even when they were overlaid. Vorkai electronic warfare was very good. The Mark 7s were created specifically to defeat E-war of that class because Earth intelligence had done its research thoroughly. The torpedoes adapted and bent, finding their targets. Over the next 2 minutes, 63 Vorkai warships were destroyed. The intercept force, which had numbered 200, was reduced to 81. The remaining 81 ships were retreating, breaking contact, something Grax's forces almost never did. The Vorkai had a reputation in the galaxy for advancing despite everything, taking losses without breaking. They were breaking. On his flagship, Supreme Warlord Grax was receiving reports that made no sense. His sensor commander was reading off numbers in a voice that had become strained and strange. The intercept force was retreating. 119 ships had vanished in less than 10 minutes. The enemy fleet of 53 ships had taken the fire of 200 Vorkai warships and was still intact, still advancing. "What kind of species is this?" Grax demanded. "Still unknown, Warlord. We have no record of their ship type anywhere in our database. Find out, Grax said. His voice was now quiet. The near laugh that had been there before was gone entirely. His sensor commander worked for a moment, extracting transmissions, running identification algorithms. Warlord, he finally said. The intercept force managed to intercept part of a communication signal between the enemy ships before their encryption activated. We identified the language. He paused. It is human, from the Sol system. Grax stared at him. Humans, he said flatly. Yes, Warlord. A young species from the Sol Death World system. Grax looked back at the tactical display, at the 53 unknown ships that were still pushing a breach in his battle line where 119 of his warships had been. He was a man who hadn't felt real uncertainty in 20 years. He felt it now. Recall the main fleet, he said. Full battle formation, all of them. If 53 human ships just destroyed 119 of his warships in 10 minutes, then the full Vorkai fleet of 2,000 ships must deal with this right now before the situation gets worse. This was exactly what Admiral Kim had been waiting for. She watched as the main Vorkai fleet began to move and felt something click into place in her chest. The confidence of a plan working exactly as intended. All ships, she said over the fleet channel. Phase 2. Draw them in. The human fleet began to retreat slowly, moving toward a specific set of coordinates deep in the outer system that they had already prepared as a tactical kill zone. A place where local gravity gradients and debris fields would shatter the advantage of Vorkai broad formations and drive them into ranges where every human weapon system worked best. The Vorkai followed. They were angry. They were confused, and they were pursuing 53 ships with nearly 2,000. They did not yet realize they were not hunting. They were being hunted. The kill zone was called the Drift. It was a region of the outer Tirian system where, millions of years ago, a planet collision had scattered massive chunks of rock and heavy metals across a wide belt. The debris was dense in places, thin in others, riddled with gravitational currents from a pair of remnants of small brown dwarfs, making navigation unpredictable for vessels using standard autopilot. The human ships had been programmed with a full sensor map of the drift before they left Earth. The dreadnoughts could pass through it cleanly, quickly, using the debris as cover. For the Vorkai fleet, using broad attack formations, the drift was a nightmare. Admiral Kim watched on the tactical display as the main Vorkai fleet entered the outer edge of the zone. Exactly as her simulation teams predicted, the broad formation immediately began to compress. Ships crowded inward to avoid collisions with debris. Flanking wings fell behind as pilots had to maneuver around dense rock clusters. The coherent front line that made Vorkai tactics so destructive began to fall apart into small, uncoordinated groups. Now, Kim said, the human fleet stopped retreating. It turned. All 53 ships simultaneously changed course and returned through the gaps in the debris at full engine power. The dreadnoughts led the attack. Their massive hulls squeezed between rock formations that should have been impossible for vessels of that size, moving with a precision that spoke of months of navigation training in drift simulations. Cruiser wings came in at angles from the sides, appearing between large clusters of debris at ranges the Vorkai commanders had not expected. The destroyers were already ahead, having slipped through narrow passages during the retreat. Now they were behind parts of the Vorkai fleet and cutting off escape routes. This was not a front line. This was an ambush. A full-scale fleet ambush, executed by 53 ships against 2,000 on terrain that turned Vorkai numbers from an advantage into a problem. The forward Vorkai cruiser groups collided directly with the returning dreadnoughts at close range. Close range was worse for the Vorkai. At distance, their energy weapons could focus and sustain fire. At close range, the human ships could use their rail batteries on single targets with devastating effect. And the Vorkai couldn't concentrate enough beams to overwhelm the reactive armor before their ships were already destroyed. Iron Resolve struck the first group of Vorkai cruisers. Commander Pak Ji-ho stood at the weapons station and worked side by side with his crew with a focus that left no room for anything except the next target. The ship shook from impacts. Warning signals sounded. They were answered and muted. The rail batteries fired in sequence, tracking and reloading, tracking and reloading. A mechanical rhythm his crew had practiced 1,000 times in simulations and was now performing in reality without error. A Vorkai heavy cruiser came in from the port side, its full battery turned toward Iron Resolve, pouring energy into the hull in a continuous stream. Armor readings dropped in the front left section, dropped again. The ship's damage control systems compensated, redistributing shields, but now it was taking real damage. "Strike craft," Pack said. "Hangar 1 and Hangar 2. Target the cruiser on our port side." The strike hangars opened. 48 small strike vessels came out quickly, already on course, already targeting. They weren't the most powerful weapon in the fleet. They were fast and accurate. They went for specific systems on the Vorkai cruiser, not the hull, but the sensor arrays, communication antennas, point defense turrets. In 30 seconds, they stripped the cruiser of its ability to track, communicate, or stop the torpedo that Pack then sent directly into the engine section. The cruiser disintegrated in a long, slow explosion that lit the debris field orange for a few seconds before the cold of space swallowed it. Pack moved to the next target. Throughout the drift, the battle was going the same way on every front. The Vorkai fought hard. They were not a cowardly species. Individual commanders made smart decisions, grouping ships. Some of their concentrated fire broke human shields and inflicted real damage. 2 Earth destroyers were damaged enough to retreat from the battle. 1 cruiser lost a weapons bay. The fight was not clean, but the math was inexorable. Every exchange that occurred in the drift cost the Vorkai more than it did the humans. Human ships were faster in tight spaces. Their weapons had greater range and penetrating power. Their armor absorbed more punishment, and they were trained specifically for this kind of fight, on this kind of terrain, with exactly this enemy tactic in mind. Supreme Warlord Grax watched his fleet die. Not all, not quickly, but steadily. Reports from his commanders in the drift were a stream of the same information in different words. "We are taking losses. The enemy ships cannot be stopped. We need support. We are retreating." He threw support into the gaps. He reorganized. He tried 3 separate tactical adjustments in the first hour of the battle in the drift. Each was smart. Each was the right choice against an ordinary opponent. Against this opponent, nothing worked. He had lost 280 ships. The number was growing. His commanders who had entered the drift were being cut to pieces. Those who hadn't entered the drift were being destroyed by those high-speed destroyer-class vessels that kept appearing from unexpected angles. And through it all, the 9 massive human ships at the center of the fleet did not stop. They took damage. He saw it on sensor readings, but they were still there, still fighting, still pushing his ships back. He had never seen ships of that size move the way they did. 2 hours after the battle in the drift began, Grax made a decision he had never made in 30 years of combat command. He called for a general retreat. The order went out to the entire Vorkai fleet. Retreat, disperse, regroup at the edge of the outer system. Some of his commanders managed to do it. Others were caught by the destroyers before they could reach open space. Others were struck by a final wave of Mark 7 torpedoes, which Admiral Kim had held in reserve for this very moment, calculating that a retreating fleet, believing it was escaping, would not watch for weapons coming from the sides. When the battle finally ended, when the last Vorkai warship had either jumped or been destroyed, the tactical display in Admiral Kim's command center showed 412 destroyed enemy ships, and another 218 heavily damaged vessels had jumped. It was unlikely they would be combat-ready for months. The Vorkai fleet that had arrived in Earth space with nearly 2,000 ships had been reduced to roughly 1,000, and those 1,000 remaining were fleeing. Earth had lost 4 ships, 2 destroyers and 2 cruisers, destroyed by concentrated fire. 167 crew members had died. Kim accepted the number in silence and held it for a long time. Before moving to the next order, she sent 2 high-speed strike cruisers to track the Vorkai retreat vector and confirm their destination. She ordered medical teams to the damaged ships. She assigned engineering teams to the cruisers that had taken heavy hits and needed immediate structural assessment. She put the dreadnoughts on low readiness and ordered crew rotations for rest. Then she opened the channel to Ambassador Gilvaris. The Tirian command station was very quiet. Gilvaris had watched the battle from sensor screens, trying to understand what he was seeing. He had no frame of reference for this, no context. 53 ships had just dismantled a fleet that had destroyed 1,200 of the best warships ever built by the Alliance. The numbers made no sense to him. The tactics made no sense. The way the human ships moved through the debris field, how they took Vorkai fire and kept going, how these massive vessels fought at close range with the precision of ships a tenth of their size. He had no words. He was still trying to find them, when the human admiral's voice sounded over the channel. "Ambassador, this is Admiral Kim. The main Vorkai fleet has retreated from your system. We are tracking their retreat vector. They are heading back toward Imperial territory. Based on the damage they sustained, I do not believe they will return to this system in the near future." A short pause. "Your planets are safe." Gilvaris opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Admiral," he said cautiously, "our entire fleet was gone. You had 53 ships. They had nearly 2,000. "Yes," Kim said. "You still won." "Yes." Gilvaris looked at his sensor officer, Voss, who had stood at his post the entire battle and now looked like he might collapse from exhaustion and shock. Then he looked back at the communication screen. "What are you?" he asked sincerely. Kim paused for a moment. "We are humans," she said, "from Earth. We are a young species. Most of the galaxy doesn't know much about us." Another pause. "We prefer it to stay that way, for the most part. But when someone asks for help, we show up." News spread across the galaxy the way all galactic news spreads. First slowly, then all at once. Trade ships picked up the story from Tirian communications. Diplomatic networks spread it. Intelligence services of a dozen species dug into the sensor logs the Tirian Alliance released in the weeks after the battle. The records were shocking. Data on human ships, weapons, armor. The tactics were unlike anything any species in the known galaxy had encountered. Galactic analysts spent months poring over them. The conclusion was always the same. Earth had been hiding something for decades. While posing as a minor young species barely learning to navigate the outer stars, humanity had been quietly building a military machine that outperformed every other military force in the galaxy by a significant margin. A species from a death world with twice the galactic norm gravity, with an evolutionary history of constant predator threats, with a recorded history of civilization full of war after war after war, with biology that recovered from injuries faster than most species could process them. A species that looked at the hostile galaxy around them and decided, quietly, without announcing it to anyone, to ensure they would never be the weakest beings. The Vorkai Empire sent an official diplomatic communication to Earth 3 months after the battle. It was the first diplomatic communication Earth had ever received from them. It requested a cessation of hostilities. The Earth government sent back a 1-page response that agreed to the cessation on the condition that the Vorkai Empire fully withdraw from all territory of the Tirian Alliance and pay reparations determined by the Tirian court. The Vorkai agreed. They were left with no choice that made sense to reject. Advisor Vet stood at the command tower's observation window again. The stars looked different, warmer now. The Vorkai fleet had left 2 weeks ago. The outer planets were being resettled. Defensive stations were being rebuilt. The Tirian Alliance had a long, difficult, expensive road ahead. Vet knew that, but they were alive. The planets were intact. The species continued to exist. He had a meeting scheduled for the next day with Admiral Kim, who had remained in the system for another 2 months, to ensure the Vorkai didn't send any follow-up forces. He had prepared a list of questions for her. Diplomatic questions. Questions about an alliance. Trade questions. Questions about what kind of relationship the Tirian Alliance and Earth could build in the future. He had one question he planned to ask before all the others. When he had sent that SOS, he had sent it to every Death World species within range, the Kreta, the Valduns, the Burning Hands of Sarat, the humans, all of them. He hadn't expected an answer from any of them. He had sent the signal because there was nothing else left to do. Only one species answered. He wanted to ask why, what made them come when no one else would. What logic or value or calculation led a young species to travel 61 light-years to deploy its most powerful fleet into someone else's war? He suspected that when he asked Admiral Kim this question, she wouldn't have a complicated answer. He suspected the answer would be very simple. He was right. When he asked the next morning, sitting at the conference table opposite the small human woman with calm eyes, Kim looked at him for a moment and then said, "Because you asked, and because it was the right thing to do." Vet sat with that for a long time after the meeting ended. Somewhere in the galaxy, other species were updating their intelligence files on humanity, revising threat assessments, adding page after page to what had previously been a thin, unremarkable profile of a young species from a death world that no one had paid attention to. From now on, the galaxy would pay attention. From now on, when an SOS went out into the darkness between the stars, every species in the galaxy would wonder, Would this be the time the humans were the ones to answer? And every species that had ever thought about starting a war of conquest would think very carefully about whether this young species from a high-gravity death planet had a reason to care who they were attacking. The answer for any species unlucky enough to threaten the innocent was simple. Humanity had always had a reason, and humanity always showed up.